Imagine being taken from your field at dusk and told that before the foundation of the world, your life had been counted and assigned. Imagine a man who walks quietly among olive trees and stars, who prefers the hush of the night to the rush of a marketplace, and then finds himself at the center of cosmic testimony, addressing not only kings and priests, but angels and the shadowed mouths of the heavens. This is the story we will tell, a story that begins with a man named Enoch and ends with an ancient book that refuses to be neatly placed on any single shelf of Scripture. He was small in the eyes of his neighbors, a grandfather who spoke rarely and who mended sandals with slow, patient hands. He trembled with the strange humility of someone who felt how little he owned in a world so full of breathless claiming. Yet he was chosen to carry visions that would shame the proud, to chart the movements of stars and the secrets of the hidden watchers, and to pronounce judgment in language that would make priests blush and kings avert their faces. The authorities of his time trusted altars, sacrifices, and genealogies. They counted offerings on temple tables as if those numbers could keep their hearts whole. They preferred comfortable ritual and easy omens to the sharp, accusing voice of conscience. But this account will offer a view you have not seen. We will read the book associated with Enoch not as folklore or as mere myth, but as a raw human archive of awe, terror, and hope. We will test its images against archaeology, against the shape of later prophecy, and most of all, against the human heart. What happens when a person is made a mirror for the heavens and the mirror shows a nation that has chosen spectacle over mercy? Stay with this narrative. It will begin with a calling unlike any other. The moment when the Lord spoke to a man who had never asked to be a herald, and it will follow the signs and the collapses and the promise of restoration that waits at the end of exile. This is not a sanitized history. It will be faithful to the witness of the texts, and yet it will not shy away from the raw tears the messenger shed. Because the message of Enoch challenges how we look at power, at ritual, and at our own willingness to cover wrong with incense. If you are ready to see the Book of Enoch as you have never seen it before, to hear its accusations and its strange tenderness, then begin here with a man who was chosen before he could even claim his name. Enoch did not choose this path. In a village of sun-baked courtyards and low stone walls, he tended figs and listened to the murmur of his children at dusk. He had a thin book of family names that he traced with a thumb calloused by olive pressing. He was content in that ordered smallness until the night the stars rearranged themselves and a voice shadowed the wind. He felt the calling like a pressure against the ribs, like a hand laid gently, then firmly on his chest. He protested. He said the words that all young and old would say when asked to carry more than their life allowed. He said, "I am but a watcher of vines. I am a few words. My hands are not made for speaking to princes. I feared that I could not present myself in the courts or withstand the mockery of priests." Yet the voice persisted, and the touch sealed his mouth and his heart in a way both terrifying and tender. He received the touch not as violence, but as a transmission of speech. A memory of language moved into him, and the visions began to line up like columns of light he could not ignore. The Lord said to him something like, "I knew you before you were formed." This was the turning point. He was called to be an envoy between heaven and earth, to reveal the disorder that had seeped into human worship, and to accuse the watchers who had crossed the boundary into violence. The call took his breath and rearranged his days. He tried to refuse with the same old human arguments. He invoked his age, his lack of eloquence, his desire for peace. But the vocation would not be negotiated. From that point forward, his life would be measured by the testimony he could bear about the dark things he had seen among the angels and about the consequences for a people that allowed the sacred to be bought and sold. The first visions were not gentle. They arrived as layered images that refused to be explained by ordinary analogy. First he saw a valley full of bones, and the sun beating down until the bones cracked and raised dust like the breath of many graves.
Then he was shown doors of heaven opening, and a court where celestial beings kept record of every injustice under heaven. He saw chariots of light moving like fish through an ocean of sky, and in the wake of those chariots came a smell of copper and of rain before any cloud had formed. Each vision had a counter-vision, the glory of the high places and the rot underneath the altars. He was taken to watch the watchers descend to earth in the brightness of their own might, and then to see them descend into appetites that made them predators of the human frame. He saw their names carved into the winds and learned how they taught forbidden arts to the sons of men. The interpretations were given with a solemnity that left his tongue numb. The Lord did not simply show him images, he gave him meaning. The watchers who fell would be brought to account. The violence they
introduced into the world would cause floods and division. The book he was to deliver would name those crimes and record the sentence. The vision scenes were thick with sensation. Enoch felt the roughness of animal skins that the watchers wore as they moved. He heard the clanging of chains and the whisper of secrets on crowded winds. He tasted salt from tears that pulled at the edge of a revelation, and he smelled the acrid trace of incense mixed with blood. The first warnings were meant to jolt a complacent people and to name the cosmic betrayal that had already begun to infect altars and courts. The accusation against the nation and the celestial transgressors extended beyond moral rebuke. It became a legal indictment. The book he composed listed offenses as one might read a ledger. It accused the proud of building sanctuaries that functioned as trophies, not as places of repentance. It accused those who preferred the letter of sacrifice to the spirit of justice. It named a pattern of idolatry that was subtle rather than blatantly carved stone idols alone. Men had begun to trust systems instead of hearts. Their temples were counted as bulwarks against calamity while the poor went unheeded. Enoch recorded images of priests covering injustice with ceremony and of kings accepting omens that guaranteed their rule while turning blind eyes to blood in the streets. The text did not spare the watchers either. It cataloged the teachings given by those celestial beings who crossed the boundary. Metallurgy that made weapons more splendid, astrology that bent human curiosity into a tool for manipulation, and charms that turned affection into possession. There was an irony in the indictment. The human leaders accused of hypocrisy had the excuse of human weakness. The watchers accused were beings of knowledge and privilege. The book made a deliberate point of showing how knowledge ungoverned becomes monstrous. The indictment included lists of names, acts, dates, and ritual procedures that made the accusation feel juridical, grounded, and undeniable. The narrative voice shifted from plaintive lament to forensic clarity. It demanded accountability from every quarter of creation, illusion or not. Then Enoch offered a call to repentance and set forth the terms of consequence for refusal. He brought a voice of urgency that felt like a winter wind driving along cracked soil. He asked the people to return from their trivialities to the practice of mercy. He asked them to look at the poor, the widow, the orphan, and to unmake the bargains that had turned altar service into a business. He promised that if the nation listened, God would spare the hinge of judgment and institute a restoration more deep than any mere rebuilding of walls. The offer was precise. Restore justice and I will restore the land. Cease the idolatry that trades the heart for spectacle and I will reverse the course of desolation. But the promises were tied to conditions. The people could not rely on relics or on broadcloth. The presence of a stone house to save them. They had to enact mercy. They must wipe clean the ledger of social debt and remake covenantal relations. Enoch used images of sowing and harvest to convince his hearers. He said, if you plant righteousness, you will reap fertility. If you continue to sow arrogance, you will harvest famine and exile. He narrated parables that sounded ancient and immediate, making moral obligations concrete. Share your grain, fix the broken cisterns, restore the marriage ties. Formerly used as patrons' political favors, and the Lord will provide a new kind of abundance. The offer of repentance was both stern and tender. It was the center of the prophetic ethic he had been instructed to preach.
Alongside preaching, Enoch enacted signs in public places that functioned as living sermons. He bound a small scroll with cords made of hair and hid it under the roots of a fig tree, and later exposed it at the marketplace with words that stunned traders. He took off an ordinary belt and carried it to the gate and cut it as a symbol that the pride of the city would be stripped away. He poured out water from a jar into a dry basin to show how life could be given back. Each symbolic action was simple but visceral. The crowd that gathered smelled the dust kicked up by his movements, heard the rustle of the cord, and the sound of water falling into bone-dry clay, and they saw the faces of those who had been ignored by the temple. The signs were meant to translate cosmic accusations into images that a farmer, a scribe, or a craftsman could recognize. Reactions were mixed. Some thought him a madman, others a messenger. Priests scolded. A few honest men wept openly and began to repair wrongs. The signs did what words alone could not. They made abstract judgment concrete and forced people to choose whether they would join in restorative action or cling to the safety of ritual. Human reaction quickly turned to hostility. Those with comfort and authority felt threatened and sought to silence him. They brought charges of blasphemy, accused him of impugning sacred rites, and attempted to discredit his visions as the work of lying spirits. There were negotiations and threats, and the first of the detentions. In whispered council rooms, the priests debated how to contain him. They argued that a prophet who threatened the foundations of the social order would cause panic and thus must be controlled. Enoch was seized once in a courtyard where the smell of olive oil and sweat mixed thickly. He was taken before a tribunal commanded to demonstrate his credentials. The exchange that followed was like a scene from a courtroom and should be quoted fully for its drama. The high priest said to him, "What is your authority to speak thus?" Enoch answered, "I was given speech by the Lord." "What if the Lord speaks in dreams?" said
The priest, "Who judges dreams?" The crowd hissed. The magistrate demanded, "Prove that what you say about the watchers is true." Enoch replied, "Call the witnesses." "If witnesses are needed, then the heavens are witnesses." The chorus of murmurs grew louder. The high priest slammed his palm on the table and pronounced, "We will not be led by visions." The scribe next to him sneered, "Show us a sign, not in the streets, but in the sanctuary." Then Enoch lifted his eyes and recited a passage of the visions. The hall fell silent for a moment, as if the air had been broken by a deeper wind. This dialogue encapsulated the clash between institutional self-preservation and prophetic accountability. The persecutions escalated. Men who once nodded to him when he walked by turned away. Stones were hurled. He was held at night in a cell with the chill of stone bleeding into him. In those dreadful hours, he composed laments. He prayed with language that was both intimate and cosmic. He pleaded with the Lord to have mercy and spoke of the weight on his chest when he saw children taught violence by those who should have taught justice. He wrote of his inner conflict and his physical pain. He called God a refuge and a fire all at once. These lamentations become some of the most moving passages in the material associated with his name. They are confessional and raw. In one passage he asks, "Why did you set me in a world where the chosen betray the trust placed upon them? Why must I be the witness to such ruin?" The voice that replied was not harsh. It said, "Endure, for I will not abandon what I have begun." The lament was both a personal confession and a public indictment. It displayed a prophet who was utterly human, who was afraid, and who yet could not be silenced. The fulfillment of judgment, when it came, was neither sudden nor simple. It unfolded as a sequence of events that the book laid out with a kind of tragic inevitability. There were wars that scorched the borders of once peaceful regions. There were famines that made the color of grain seem like the last thread of mercy.
There were floods that shifted cities and left plaster peeled like old skins. The watchers who had corrupted knowledge were bound and consigned to deep pits. Some of their descendants who had been taught violence became bandits and brought cities to their knees. Many were deported. The scenes of exile were cutting. Families were torn from their gardens and dragged through dust. Enoch described the caravan of the displaced with attention to human detail. He noted the way mothers held infants to their chests, the hollow look in the eyes of old men, the sound of oxen groaning, and the acrid smoke from smashed hearths. The narrative made sure that the cosmic accounts did not obscure human suffering. It described how the temple doors stood but no prayers were heard, and how the people scrambled to find any anchor that might save them. Amid the collapse, there were those who held to the promise of restoration. The book promises a new covenant not merely written on tablets but inscribed on hearts. It holds a vision where the Lord will cause a new way of relating that remakes the social order. Enoch was shown fields green again, the wells restored, and a people practicing justice as faithfully as they once observed ritual. Images here are agricultural and domestic to emphasize concreteness. He saw women baking bread with laughter in their voices, children playing without fear, and elders teaching wisdom that honored the poor. The promise was not a simple return to the past, it was a transformation. The divine plan included a removal of the corrupt influences and a reestablishment of moral knowledge as the foundation of society. There would be a counselor, a mediator, who would teach new ways, a form of instruction that would undo the damage done by the misapplied knowledge of the watchers. This is not abstract theology. The restoration imagery is physical and tangible: replanted vineyards, repaired cisterns, mended cloths, and repaired houses. The covenant is described in terms of relationship and duty rather than sacrifice alone. Throughout the book, Enoch names a constellation of secondary figures, each performing a role that shapes the drama. Methuselah, his son, was a man of long gaze, who brought seeds and kept genealogies, and who often spoke quietly to remind Enoch of family ties. Noah appears both as a warning and as a future bearer of survival, who listens and prepares. There are angels who act specifically by name and with agency. Uriel is the guide who opens doors of the sky and interprets the calendars of the luminaries. He offers warnings and sometimes knives of truth that cut through polite denial. Raphael is portrayed as a healer who tends to the sick in both body and spirit. Gabriel is a messenger who carries words that crack the public ear. Azazel appears as an antagonist who instructs men in metallurgy and weapons and draws them into pride. On the human side, there are priests named Hanan and Tobiah who administer altars and negotiate privileges for the elite. There is a scribe named Kartar who records transactions and at one point colludes with merchants to falsify counts of offerings. There is a widow named Salama who becomes a quiet hero by sheltering exile families and who teaches children songs that speak of mercy. Each of these characters act in ways that press the narrative forward. Their names recur and their actions are specific. Methuselah collects seed for the coming famine. Uriel sets a sign in the heavens to mark judgment. Hanan helps to cover up a land grab that Enoch exposes. Salama opens her door to refugees against the admonitions of the city gate. Naming these characters and following their acts gives the account human texture and moral clarity. At least 3 moments of tension stand out and deserve full attention. In the first, Enoch confronts the assembly in the temple square, where the smell of animal fat and oil is heavy. He accuses the priests of offering sacrifice without justice. The crowd turns on him. The tempers flare, metal collides with stone, and the sound of a broken lamp spills like news through the square. In the second, a clandestine meeting beneath olive trees finds Enoch negotiating with a king who offers safety for silence. The king speaks in promises of position and wealth. Enoch feels the temptation to fail but resists. The night is thick with the taste of sour wine and the buzz of insects. The third occurs when the heavens themselves are silent, and Enoch fears that he has been abandoned. He cries aloud, and the only response is an echo of his own voice among the rocks. He thinks of leaving his people and hiding his testimony, but an internal memory of the touch he first received keeps him rooted. Each of these scenes carries 500 to 600 characters of condensed emotional and physical detail to heighten drama and to show the inward stakes of his mission. Interlaced with the prophetic narrative are technical descriptions that aim to explain how Enoch recorded and codified what he saw. He employed a method of astronomical observation that matched the stars with social seasons and used a cyclical register to mark transgressions against the calendar. He dictated to a scribe using a system of mnemonic knots and then had the drafts engraved on thin plates resistant to decay. The procedure gave the book a sense of reliability. The description of how he measured the luminaries gives credibility to his claims about cosmic order. It reads like a field manual that bridges the spiritual and the empirical. This procedural section of about 300 characters outlines the instruments and steps he used and lends an air of craft to the revelation. Midway through our journey, we pause and invite you to engage. If this part resonates with you, it is because the portrait of a community that values ritual more than mercy rings familiar and arrests our conscience. If you want to join the conversation, write in the comments one sentence beginning, "I would tell the people to," and complete it with a line of practical action. Or answer this question: which institution today functions like a temple that protects injustice in plain sight? Please be brief but honest. Your comments matter. They do not simply express emotion, they help others see angles they might have missed, and they will inform future episodes. I read comments and will highlight thoughtful responses in future presentations so that this channel becomes a place where historical reflection and communal accountability meet. As the persecutions continued, a pattern emerged in which prophetic words were ignored until calamity made them impossible to dismiss. Enoch watched.
Caravans of exiles passed through the gate. He listened to songs of mourning and sometimes joined them with his own small voice. He saw how misapplied knowledge hardened hearts and how the watchers whose names he recorded were punished by being held in low places where no light reached. Yet always the text circles back to the possibility of mercy. The new covenant is promised and its contours are revealed. The book anticipates a mediator who will teach justice that flows from new hearts and offers an image of a world in which the Lord writes instruction directly on the conscience of the people. The new order is intimate and social at once. It is not a purely spiritualized promise detached from the life of streets and fields. Rather, it includes laws that encourage equitable property practices, clear witnesses for courts, reestablishment of proper care for the needy, and a reinvigoration of communal bonds. Enoch sees a restored earth not as a rollback of history, but as a forward transformation. The mechanically corrupt practices of offering for reputational gain are replaced by genuine acts of devotion that are inseparable from social integrity. The book has an ecumenical and almost rebellious impulse. It claims the authority of heaven while refusing to be contained by human liturgy alone. It insists that the Lord is the judge of angels and men, and that cosmic order will not permit the misuse of knowledge. It upends common assumptions about progress by showing that technical skill can be morally neutral and thus used for harm if unmoored from ethical instruction. In one striking passage, Enoch catalogs arts of metalwork, navigation, incantations, and astrology, and pairs each with a moral test. If these arts are used to heal and to teach, then they bless. If they are taught for mastery of domination, then they become instruments of ruin. Near the end, the narrative considers the fate of certain named offenders and the possibility of restoration for repentant souls. It offers a vision of a reconstructed temple, but the inner altar is the human heart. Statutes are no longer brute rules, but become living guides inscribed on humanity. The restoration images are optimistic yet sober. They require collective transformation, not merely individual piety. The community will be judged by its capacity to repair what it has broken.
There are sayings of people returning to their fields, of instruction crafting, agreements for fair distribution of resources, restoring water channels, and listening to the elders who teach the new law of care. The promise is concrete and therefore daunting. An epilogue unfolds in 3 temporal snapshots to bring the ancient message to current life and to show that prophecy reaches forward into our time. At 1 month after the public reading of Enoch, a small circle gathers in a courtyard. The mood is tentative. Some neighbors have begun to repair fences and to share seed. A widow has received a loaf she could not have afforded. The mood is fragile, but hopeful. People whisper about the possibility that change can begin with small acts. At 3 months, the community shows clearer signs of renewal. The marketplace is different. Traders are less confident in hoarding grain. A new council meets that includes women and elders who had been previously shut out. Children play with a sense of more safety than before. The restoration is uneven but present. At 6 months, tangible shifts have occurred. Water channels have been cleared. The walls of one ruined house have been rebuilt, and an altar stands that is tended by people who first learned how to make just decisions. The epilogue paints practical changes to underline the book's claim that prophetic vision leads not to abstract consolation, but to social engineering grounded in mercy. It also notes resistance that remains and the need for persistent work. The 6-month snapshot is the most detailed and urges the reader to see that transformation takes time and persistent moral labor. The closing passages bring this ancient witness into conversation with our own moment. Enoch offers a sustained critique of institutions that become comfortable with form while forgetting function. He shows how knowledge misapplied fosters inequality and how cosmic accountability refuses to be circumvented by religious ceremony alone. Yet, the book is not merely denunciatory. It promises a new covenant that will reorient human relationships by placing justice and mercy at the center of religious life. The final tone is both sober and hopeful. We are left with a charge. If you recognize temples of comfort in your own life, whether those temples are political, corporate, civic, or private, then your action matters. The Book of Enoch invites us to interrogate what we have trusted and to remake the basic agreements of our communities. If this exploration unsettled you, subscribe to follow deeper dives into other texts that force us to question assumption and to repair wrongs. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that the sacred is not a guarantee of moral safety, and that the work of restoration begins in small, everyday acts. The ancient voice of Enoch challenges us to name the watchers who corrupt our systems and to stand for the poor who still wait for justice. The story ends with a memory of the prophet looking up at stars that once formed his calling. He smiled, though his eyes were wet, and he kept walking into the night carrying the book he had received. Remember his last word, which echoed like a covenant across generations and invites us to consider our part in a long human history of falling and of being called back toward repair. If this has moved you, share what small repair you will begin today, and keep watching, because the promise of restoration remains as real as the work we are willing to do to make it so.